Okay, hello chess players. Today we're going to be taking a look at the King's Indian defense beginning after d4, knight f6, c4, g6 begins the King's Indian. And more specifically, we're going to be taking a look at the four pawns attack, which happens after knight to c3, bishop g7, e4 castles, and then white takes over the whole middle with pawn to f4 and just tries to take over absolutely everything in the middle of the board by placing all four pawns in the middle of the board. Anyways, if you like content like this and want to see more of it, please hit that subscribe button and click on your notification icon. Well, certainly here you should play d6 and then knight f3, and we're basically in the main line. Now, at this point, black has two options to play for, and they're highlighted. Black can play for the idea of playing pawn to c5, and of course, black can play for the traditional King's Indian defense idea, which is to play pawn to e5. Now, of these two, the easiest is probably going to be something like pawn to c5, and you turn this into a Benoni. The reason it's beneficial to turn this type of position into a Benoni is it's very similar to the mainline Benoni, but without one of the big problems you have in the mainline Benoni. So if we go back to like the first three moves, let's say that we just play a mainline Benoni beginning with c5, and then we have d5, e6, and we just go into this main line. In this main line, white can go after that whole middle of the board, but after bishop g7, this move bishop to b5 check is a possibility. Not only is it a possibility, it's actually something that's really desirable. This is called the Taimanov variation. And after bishop to b5 check, it's sort of a disruptive move. Black doesn't have a great way to block the check. You know, he can either retreat this knight, bring this other knight out, which runs into its own problems. Every move that he has to block the check runs into its own problems, basically. So this is considered slight edge white, possibly even as much as major advantage white, just playing this Taimanov variation. But when they go into this same type of structure by playing the four pawns attack, they've cut out the possibility of the Taimanov variation because, of course, the black king is already castled and you don't have the king on e8. So that means after f4, d6, knight f3, when you continue with a move like c5 and then they play d5, you're going to exchange on d5, transpose into the mainline Benoni, but now the bishop is on e2 and there is no possibility of bishop b5 check. Now, that being said, that is, of course, not the only way that you can play against the four pawns attack. It is also possible to play pawn to e5. Now, if you're going to play a move like pawn to e5, what I would recommend is go down the route that Kasparov went down. Kasparov played this move knight to e6. This was Latier versus Kasparov, played back in 1995. And I know what a lot of you are thinking. A lot of you are thinking, why can't White just play e5 himself and prevent me from playing pawn to e5? You know, if I'm playing knight a6 with the idea of playing pawn to e5, why can't White just do that? Why can't White just play e5? Well, if White plays e5, then Black is going to play knight d7, and the idea is to basically undermine this big center that White's got with d6 and c5. And this is actually very similar to Latier, a different Latier and spelled slightly differently, and I might be pronouncing it wrong. It might have been Lederer or something like that. But this is very similar to Lederer versus Fischer, which continued. It was from a different move order. It was from castles and then e5 knight e8 and then f4, but it was the same idea, basically d6 and c5. So here, black is at least equal. It's equal according to the engine, but probably even as much as slight edge black. Black is going to be breaking up the center with d6 and c5, and after the center breaks up, white's actually going to have more weaknesses in his camp than black is going to have in his. So this, in my mind, this should already be slight edge black, just knight d7. So e5 isn't anything that we need to worry about from white. The main move that we're going to run into here is bishop e2. It is also possible to play bishop to d3 instead of bishop to e2, and we would meet this much the same way that Kasparov met bishop e2. So against bishop e2, Kasparov played e5, and his idea was fe5, de5, and then d5. His idea was knight c5, and he had approximate equality. He's double attacking that pawn on e4, so of course the pawn on e5 is not capturable. And Kasparov went on to get a draw against Latier. The game lasted about 28 moves. The draw was agreed. That was Latier versus Kasparov, played back in 1995. So other than bishop e2, bishop d3 is also possible. You might have noticed that after e5 takes d5, if we play knight to c5, this pawn is now double protected, so maybe the e5 pawn is a problem. The correct move is supposed to be c6. And then there is actually a big issue with knight takes e5. Against knight takes e5, we can play rook e8, going after that pawn on the e4 square. And now if knight f3, we can actually just take. And of course, we have f5 coming as backup. And if something like bishop e4, we would have takes, takes, takes. And this would actually be decisive advantage black, according to the engine. So knight takes e5, as it turns out, is nothing to fear. We can play rook e8, and I know a lot of you are thinking again, like, what if we just hold it, like bishop f4? Well, apparently queen b6 is a problem. So something like queen b6, knight a4, queen d4, bishop e2, queen takes d1, rook takes d1, knight takes e4 is also supposed to be decisive advantage black. There's a double threat against the knight on e5, and black has a lot of activity here, and the white king is still in the middle. So this is a problem. So this is actually decisive advantage black as well. So this route of playing this route of playing after, say, bishop d3, pawn to e5, takes is totally acceptable. The move here is c6, and that's if they plant the bishop on d3. If they plant the bishop on e2, the route is e5 takes, and then knight to c5 is supposed to be approximate equality. But going back to this main line, the main line should be something like c5, and then we're going to have pawn to d5, we're going to have pawn to e6, bishop e2, ed5, cd5, and then the main move that should give you easy equality is going to be something like rook e8, just putting pressure on that e4 pawn. Now, it is also possible to play this more positionally, like if you just don't want to go into the main lines, where white gets to kind of play his aggressive attacking chess with pawn to e5, which is basically forced here. He doesn't have a choice. You can try something a little more positional. You can try bishop g4. I've got a game here, Tonchiva versus Nakamura, played on chess.com back in 2023, that continued with castles, and then Nakamura actually played bishop takes f3 unprompted, which I definitely disagree with. I think this is wrong, and it should just be major advantage white after bishop takes f3 unprompted. But it is possible to just wait for the prompt or force a prompt. You can play rook e8, gain that extra move, wait for h3, and then take, and then take. Um, the reason that you play chess like this, I mean, exchanging the bishop, not waiting for the prompt. The reason that people play bishop g4 to f3 is because in the Benoni you have less space, and typically when you get rid of the light scored bishop, it really helps out your position structurally. You can play a6 and knight on b to d7, and you're just like one move away from having your rooks connected, and therefore that makes it easy for all of your plans to work for like queenside expansion, etc. So if you play this line with rook e8 first, wait for h3, bishop f3, you have a relatively unclear position, and it's easy to get to a position where you have approximate equality here with black. And again, I wouldn't recommend taking on f3 without being prompted. That extra tempo probably does matter in the fight for whether white's going to play e5 or whether you're going to expand on the queen side. But if you just want to play the absolute correct move, probably the immediate rook e8 is the absolute correct move. Just force this pawn to e5. And as it turns out, this forcing continuation probably favors black a little bit. So this might be even as much as slight edge black. We're going to see d takes e5, f takes e5. We're going to see knight to g4, and then we're going to see e6. And again, these pawn pushes might look frightening, but keep in mind that it's black that's forcing white to push and not the other way around. It's not like white is doing this out of just attacking fervor and the fact that he has all this extra development. He doesn't. White is behind in development and he's not castled yet. Black is the one that's developed, so all these pawn pushes can really only favor black. So we have f takes e6, and then we have pawn to d6. It is also possible to castle kingside here. E takes d5 should just be slight edge black. Everything should be fine. An example would be like knight takes d5, bishop e6, bishop c4, and then knight e5 would hit that bishop on c4, bishop g5, knight f3 check, queen f3, and then queen g5 would be an example. This is Nimala versus Tao, played in Riga back in 1959, so we've got some theory going back pretty far here. But black is doing pretty well here. The position is still, of course, very complex, but black is coming out on top in these complications. So going back, we have f takes e6, we have pawn to d6, we have bishop to d7, knight g5, knight back to e5, castles kingside, knight on b to c6 should be complete equality. So it is also possible to play the bishop to c6. That's been played in games before. It's not clear if that's fully equal. The computer, again, gives just knight on b to d6 as completely equal. And the line that it gives is after something like, say, knight b5. Knight on g e4 is also possible. Knight d4 is equality, apparently. Knight b5, we're going to have knight to d4, and knight d4 should be slight edge black. So probably knight on g to e4 last move was a little bit better. But on knight b5, knight d4 is slight edge black. things could continue. For example, knight c7, bishop c6, or actually sacking the exchange, knight e8, queen e8, bishop f4, queen back to d8, just going after this pawn, rook f2, queen d6, and with this big clump of pieces in the middle of the board that cannot be removed, black is actually better, even though he's down the exchange. Black just has all of his pieces located on these ideal squares. This is slight edge black according to the engine. So anyways, that's really how we should deal with the four pawns attack. The easiest way to deal with it, and the move that I full-heartedly recommend, is c5. That doesn't mean that knight a6 followed by, say, e5 is not possible. That's certainly a very reasonable way to play against the four pawns attack if you want to go down that route. But by far and away, the easiest way to meet it is to play c5 and just go into this Benoni structure, and then playing the immediate rook e8 and just going into this very forcing continuation is just going to be the easiest way to get equality with black. Anyways, I hope you liked this video. I hope you found this information helpful. I hope you can use some of these ideas in your own games. Thank you very much for watching.